I'm really pleased today to be here with Reggie Gibbs, who has just published his book, Beyond the Urals, which is a fascinating read. I just bought it as an ebook and started. I'm only on chapter 3, but I can see it's going to be really a great read. And Reggie lives and works in New York City, where he also volunteers for the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which is kind of interesting to me since I'm an artist. And he served in the infantry of the United States Marine Corps with 4 overseas deployments and 2 tours of Iraq. He was awarded the Marine Corps Commendation Medal with the combat V denoting valor. And he's traveled across Russia via the Trans-Siberian Railroad. That's going to become important in a moment to know that piece of information. He has a master from Georgetown University in Russian studies. And this book is all about Russia. So I wonder, Reggie, if you could tell us a little bit about your background, your life story, how you grew up, and then maybe let that lead you into what was it that inspired you to write this book.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Karen. First of all, it's an honor to be with you and on your program. I appreciate it, and giving me the opportunity to talk about the book. Yeah, so I live, work in New York City. Not a Big Apple native. I'm actually have grown up a lot of places around the United States. Originally coaster. I still have family up in the Mount Hood area and Portland area, and then up in Puget Sound, up in Washington. But I spent probably most of my life in the southern United States, but actually went to high school out your way in Southern California, so Whittier. But my most of my years, my youth, and then later on in my professional life, have been mostly on the East Coast and in the South. I attended the Citadel for my undergraduate degree. So it was class of '98. It's a military school in Charleston, South Carolina. I got my commission out of there into the U.S. Marine Corps that year. Selected the infantry, and then was in the Marine Corps, of course, before and then in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. A couple of years in the Corps were spent, mostly doing peacetime operations. I did one deployment to Southeast Asia and the Middle East. And then post 9/11, did some tours in Africa, and then was in the invasion of Iraq in 2003, and then a subsequent tour in Iraq in 2004. So my time in the Marine Corps, my time in Iraq, after the invasion, we moved to, my unit was in Baghdad, but then we moved to the province of, which is where the ruins of ancient Babylon are. And I was put in charge of the police force there. So I like to tell people I was the police chief of Babylon at one point in my life. But yeah, some incredible, very, very obviously hard work, but it was an honor to serve. And then my second tour in Iraq was in Al Anbar. When I left the Marine Corps in 2004, I went to grad school. I did one graduate degree at the University of Kentucky, and I did some more time in the Middle East, and then also studied in Russia at the time. And then when I got to Washington, D.C., I worked at the Pentagon for a short while, mostly working on projects that dealt with the Caucasus, the Southern Caucasus, which had been part of the Soviet Union before it broke up in 1991. And during that time, I did another master's at Georgetown University, this time in Russian studies. So my
Could
interest.
I ask a little question?
Sure.
So you went to school at the Citadel and you went right into military life. Did you come from a military family?
No, I didn't. My dad was actually a teacher,
Mhm.
and a high school school headmaster. My mother was a nurse. So I didn't come from a big military family. I did have, my grandfather served in World War II. He was a Navy man. His brother, whom I never met because he was actually killed in the war. He was the first officer in our family. So I was the second officer. When I got my commission in '98. So yeah, it's just something that I wanted to do, and I felt the calling to do, so I did it.
Uh-huh. Was there something about the way that you grew up that planted that desire in you?
Um, not necessarily. I think a lot of, and that's an interesting question. You know, uh, I think a lot of kids, as they grow up, they look for ways to sort of separate themselves, from their family, kind of their own identity.
Mhm.
And a lot of times that's done in, rather destructive way with, being a rebel and stuff. So I guess that, my interest in the U.S. military and specifically the Marine Corps, which, I think most people would agree is the most elite of the major branches. I guess that was kind of my just initial way interests, to kind of separate myself and say, this is who I am. This is what I want to do. And my parents were always very supportive of that. So,
Well, it also means you have to have a certain toughness of character that you're willing to submit yourself to that kind of discipline and structure and just really tough, hard labor. I mean, what was it that built that into you that you were willing? I mean, that's not typical, I would say, of young people nowadays.
oh, well, yeah. I mean, I do think you're right. I mean, first of all, there has to be the desire. And, I you do have to have that toughness, and you have to have that ability to, high tolerance level. And we used to say, the only thing the Marine Corps does well is fight. So everything else, whether it's living conditions or medical care or anything like that, so you have to have a high tolerance level. But then, just for the schedule, the training schedule that we were on, for example, when we were in a deployment rotation. We would deploy in peacetime before 9/11. You would deploy essentially every 18 months. So you would get back from deployment. You would have that first 6 months to just kind of, try to get your life back to normal. But then after that initial 6 months, you start going to the field, probably, 3 or 4 days out of every week. So you basically got the weekends to yourselves, but then sometimes even those are taken up. And then after that period, you're basically on and off ship, doing different training exercises, getting ready for that long deployment. So it's you don't have you don't have the opportunity really, when you're in a deployment cycle to um to settle down and have a normal life. So it does take, uh, I think, a high degree of tolerance, of toughness, mental toughness. But again, the desire has to be there. You have to love the Marine Corps. You have to enjoy it. Um, and for me, I guess it was just built in. I can't point to any specific thing in my life and say, that's what made me be able to survive and do well in the Marine Corps. It was just there. It was, my parents did instill within me the sense that you don't quit once you start something. That's something that stuck with me and has been useful, throughout my life, not just in the Marine Corps, but obviously at the Citadel, which is itself a very arduous, experience for college. And then, you know, academics never came easy to me. But I ended up getting into, what in my view is a top school in the United States, which I was always very proud of that. And excelling there. And then, after all of that, to come to New York City. I grew up, in the suburbs of Atlanta and Los Angeles. and somehow I find myself with an office on Park Avenue. So I'm, to me, I still look up. I walk down Park Avenue, and I look up. I see the buildings. You can see the Chrysler building from where I'm at, and over a couple blocks, Empire State Building. And it's just, amazing to me that I get to experience where I'm at, and I love it. And I don't take any of that for granted, because I've worked very hard for it. And that again, those are lessons that I learned in the Marine Corps from my parents and just applied to my life.
Mhm. Well, so I was going to ask you, how would you say that your time in the Marine Corps changed you? Um, do you feel like you've already answered that question, or?
No, because I don't think that you ever stop changing. And when, I think one thing, just builds on the next. And I think when you go through life and you're looking for experiences and you're looking for the next opportunity, um, you, I think you need to look for things that build on what you have done, and not be afraid of having the next thing change you. Not fundamentally, because I think by the time you're my age, and I'm 45 years old, hopefully you have a few basic things, worked out in your life that you can say, okay, I believe this and this and this, but how can I improve myself? How can I, be better? How can I improve myself around the edges, for example? So no, the Marine Corps certainly did change me. Um, I entered the Marine Corps when I was 21, 22. So it was still, a very formidable time in my years, my youth. But I had right off the bat charged with the responsibility to lead Marines, many of which were younger than I was, 18, 19 years old themselves. So I had to grow up, I think, fast. And then, after 9/11, um, I was sent to war. I, found myself at the ripe old age of 27, invading a country, not an everyday experience. And then shortly after that, oh, by the way, we just toppled this government. Now we have to stabilize the communities, and we have to rebuild it. And you're going to be in charge of the local police force. Go to it. Good luck. So w- that obviously changes you, and um, the responsibilities that are on your shoulder, um, not just for the Americans that you're there with trying to lead, but then also you have the weight of this whole community, the Iraqis, that are really looking up to you to bring some order and semblance to their lives, because they're still parents. They care about their kids. They need jobs. They need water. They need medical care. Um, they want a government that works. So you have those responsibilities all kind of thrust on you at one time. And then there's just the things that, beyond the heavy responsibility, dealing at the same time with the things that you've just experienced. I remember for the first time seeing a battlefield in the aftermath, and you see the results of where you directed machine gun fire, or where you called in air or artillery, and you see the human suffering, and the death that came as a result of that. That's a very shocking thing, and I don't talk about it often. I talk about it with um, you know other Marines that I served with, and then with family, mostly. But it's to me, that's something that's very personal, very private, but obviously life
Right.
changing at the same
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I completely understand that, because my dad was in the military when I was born. He went into the military when he was 16. He lied about his age.
Yeah.
And he was in the infantry in the army. Actually, he was in the cavalry at the
Mhm.
beginning. But he was part of the mopping up crew that went through Europe in 43 and 44, especially at the end, going through the concentration camps and liberating the camps.
Mhm.
And he would never talk about any of that. And he was a completely changed man when he came back from the war, became an alcoholic. And I think part of that might have been because it was too hard to talk about.
Yeah.
But so the only reason I asked that question was I was thinking, as I'm reading this book, even though you're talking about Russian soldiers in the Second World War, um, it's obvious to me that you had experienced those battlefield episodes and that they had had a profound impact on the way that you looked at the world. And so I just, that's why I asked the question.
No, you're absolutely right. This book, even though it takes place in another country, in a time that my grandparents were my age, um, it's a very personal book. At the same time, not my combat experiences shine through in there, and it has a lot of me. So my combat experiences, it has my academic interests as far as Russia and the Soviet Union, other interests like art, particularly how I took great care in the book when I had the opportunity, for example, to describe architecture, and or a painting. I took great care to go into detail about what that looked like, because um, architecture to me, it, it's very similar or almost the same, but those to me, not only my interest, but I think they help tell the story as well. So yeah, there's a lot of the book.
Also a very poetic book. I think you also took great care with your language to draw on images that are, I can tell, are going to be deeply symbolic throughout the rest of the book. And I was especially captured by the story of the thrush and the icon.
Okay.
That little section right in there was when Sasha gives him the icon, just beautifully crafted.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. One chapter in particular that I'm very proud of, it's in part 3, but the main character, Arcady, actually enters a abandoned cathedral, and he sees the icons on more of a massive scale.
Mhm.
And the visuals and the images that he sees, not only on the icons, but then in the different things throughout the church, um, helps him to kind of put everything together that he has experienced throughout, the other parts of the novel. So again, it's very important that those images are conveyed and described accurately and correctly, so that you can draw the reader in there, almost make them standing in the middle of the cathedral themselves in sort of wonderment, as they're looking around at the different things. And if you've never been in a Russian Orthodox church, I'd encourage you to do that. They're quite striking, quite beautiful, with the images and the icons that are there. But yeah, it's very important that that was relayed correctly,
Mhm.
because it's a key part of establishing the message of the book.
Mhm. Well, it's a very serious book. I mean, as I said, I'm only in chapter 3, but it's a very serious book. And so you were about, at one point I interrupted you, but you were about to talk about what it was that had kind of led you to write this book, your inspiration or.
Right. Yeah, thanks. So so like I said, there's a lot of me in the book. It's kind of this conglomeration almost of everything that I'm interested in. A lot of things that I've experienced, to include my time in Russia, traveling the Trans-Siberian Railroad, which I did in 2000. Um, uh, my kind of my own journey, religious faith, because that's really what this is. It's a a soldier is essentially caught in this maelstrom of um, the situation that he doesn't understand, necessarily believe in. Um, Past events have already taken people from him that he loves, and now it's also taken, his wife. So it's a it, it's a quest for peace, um, and that's really what what the symbolism essentially is. Siberia is more or less in the book a symbol for the human soul itself. So since you've got through chapter one, you know that there's kind of this kind of heady debate that Sasha and Arcady are having about, okay, what exactly is Siberia? Why are we here in Stalingrad, to begin with? Is this city really all that important? It is for a couple reasons, but what it is it's one of the most easternmost cities in Western Russia. And if the Germans are able to conquer Stalingrad, then they're going to be able to invade Siberia. And Sasha makes the point that Siberia is akin to the soul. So Western Russia, and by the way, if you or your viewers are familiar with Russian history, this is a very old debate in all throughout Russian history, because you have Western Russia, which is generally west of the Ural Mountains, and that's known as European Russia, and it is more European than Asian. But then you have this other face of Russia. You have Siberia, and this is the thing that really makes Russia different from Europe. It's this. It stretches all the way to the Pacific Ocean. It encapsulates another whole continent, different religions, different ethnicities, different languages, and it's a represents a sort of mystical side of Russia that is not portrayed necessarily in sort of the rationalism that you see in Western Europe, and that you see in Western Russia. So there's that kind of Janus face, of the two sides of Russia. You have the European side, the side that is influenced by the ideals of the Enlightenment and all this, and then you have Siberia, sort of the soul, the undiscovered part of sort of the psyche. So that's essentially what this is Arcadia is going into his soul. And when he gets to the Ural Mountains, and you haven't gotten there yet, so I'm not going to say too much, but he essentially crosses into this other dimension. And when his wife Natasha is when her story is told, starting in part two, she experiences things very similarly. And then at the same time, you have other symbols like the thrush that you mentioned. Um, I'm not going to give away what the thrush is,
Yeah,
but obviously
yeah.
this is a Christian novel. So I'll give you a little hint. You're going to deal with the Trinity, God the Father, Christ the Son, and then the Holy Spirit, which is often depicted as a dove in art, in religious art. And then as the foil to that, there's going to be the appearance of sort of the unholy Trinity. So the devil eventually does make an appearance in the novel, representing the foil to God the Father. The the thrush represents something, and then who is the Antichrist, essentially, and that's one of the questions that gets answered by the end of the book, and one of the lessons on power, in trying to find peace in this world that is really consumed with the pursuit of power. How do we claim victory, and how do we give into temptations that might defeat us? So apologies if that was a little.
Oh, no,
No, yeah.
that's excellent, because so I've been thinking about, so I have several threads going on my channel, because I'm talking to lots of different people about things, but the overall general purpose of it is to explore how there are certain principles in the world that seem to operate at every scale.
Mhm.
And I got this idea, first of all, through my work with art and creativity, with the elements and principles of design in art. And I started to see those principles operating in physics and history and in all these arenas. And so I thought, I want to talk to people who know something about these fields, and then I can explore these ideas that I have. So one of the guys I've been talking to is a physicist who is very patiently teaching me about complexity and chaos and entropy and things like that. And he has a really brilliant mind. And he coalesced complexity down into a really interesting picture for me, that now I can see that it's one of these principles that seems to operate everywhere. He said, if you have a watch, that's complexity, because a watch has lots of parts, and the parts need to be together in order for it to be working correctly. That's a picture of complexity.
Mhm.
But whether that watch is a working watch or a pile of parts, it's equal in complexity. The difference is that when the watch is a working watch and it's put together, the inside of it is very complex to interact with. You would need to be, very knowledgeable in knowing how to keep it working and understand the inside parts. But once you're outside the watch and you interact with it, it's very simple. Just look at the hands, you have a simple rule, you know how to interact with it.
Yeah.
But this pile of parts is not simple to interact with. And yeah, I think you're probably familiar with Jordan Peterson and some of his teaching on order and chaos.
A little bit. I'm not an expert, not overly read in him.
Well, okay, you don't need to be an expert, but I mean, he just has this general idea that the world is made up of order and chaos.
Mhm.
And you can be walking around in your very orderly life, and then something terrible happens to you and you fall into chaos.
Mhm.
And because the world is made up that way, there's a boundary between order and chaos, and that the best way forward in life is to make friends with the unknown and be willing to voluntarily go over into the chaos and capture what information there that you can, and bring it back to the order to make the order more alive. But I got to thinking about that, and I thought, what if it is that the chaos is not actually chaos, but it's just unordered complexity? Because it's all about your context, right? You can
Mhm.
fall into chaos and it may look to you like none of this makes any sense. Everything is terrible. I'm drowning.
Mhm.
But if you can stop and take a look around, all the pieces that are there to help you move forward, to even in the midst of suffering, you can grow, you learn something new. So maybe that there's a lot of complexity and chaos, but it's just not ordered yet. And we have this opportunity in life to be participants in bringing that unordered complexity into order. And part of the way that happens is what we go through in life, in our life experiences of falling into chaos and then changing our context and understanding that there is actually good to be found there. So that's kind of what Arcadi's journey looks like to me. He had a life that he loved, and then he got thrust into this war, and he's in the midst of this chaos. And yet there's something there. There are pieces there that are all going to start fitting together eventually.
and it also made me, I think you've already run in, since you're in chapter 3, you've already run into this uh, this analogy, or kind of the symbol that I use in the book, and you'll see it throughout, and Arcady comes back to it constantly, and Natasha also sort of ponders it, and that is the stars. So
Yes,
yeah,
that's
when
exactly the picture of what I was thinking of, yeah.
yeah, the book really starts out with Arcady, looking up at the stars, or trying to look up at the stars, kind of wondering about them, and they look chaotic, but he still senses that there's some order there, and he kind of wonders, where does this order come from? How does it make sense? And he constantly is looking up for the stars, almost for direction, because to him, in his mind, they are chaotic, but he almost senses that that they're not. There's some rhyme or reason to it, and he's trying to figure that out. And he for some reason, he makes kind of the spiritual connection that if he can read the stars, if they speak to him, then somehow that is a symbol that all this makes sense, and he's going to be able to find his wife. Natasha is the same thing. You haven't gotten to this scene yet, but when she's at this social, in her factory city, and she sees couples dancing on the floor, the couples are dancing to this music in a fashion that, if you were to look at it just on the dance floor, it would look chaotic. But in reality, very naturally, around the floor, to the to the stars, herself. It doesn't. The stars seem many. They don't look ordered. They look chaotic, but they're all in balance. They're all in motion, and she starts to herself wonder. There a beautiful music out there that is keeping the stars, much like the couples on the dance floor, kind of in motion, in rhythm. And she, in her mind, whereas Arcady, who's still very unsettled, because he's very bitter and he's lost those he loves, he doesn't come to the conclusion that Natasha does, which is Natasha does accept that there is a higher force out there, if you're open to it. And her belief is that, however you want to describe it, the essence of that is love. And because she loves her husband, she recognizes that there is something out there greater than herself, something to put her hope in, something to believe in, and ultimately something chaotic, in order. Arcady, though, he hasn't. That's his journey. He's trying to find that still.
Yeah, and I don't want you to give anything away,
No,
because
okay.
I want everybody to buy your
All
book.
right.
So you mentioned earlier that you had your own faith journey. I wondered, would you be willing to share that with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up, in a Protestant home, Baptist, from the Bible Belt, essentially. I don't think I've ever been in the position where I say I lost my faith. It, but there has been, um, a good portion of my life where it really didn't mean anything to me. So it's not like I rebelled against it and raised my fist towards God or Christ and said, I firmly reject this. I just didn't have, I think, a deep understanding of it. And um, it's I think faith is a journey. I'm very skeptical of. I'm not saying it can't happen, but I'm very skeptical of people that have these just sort of life-changing conversions in a very short amount of time. Um, I again, not saying it can't happen, and that God works in mysterious ways. So but I do tend to raise an eyebrow with that, because to me, um, kind of jumping from what you learn in Sunday school to having a mature and adult understanding of religious faith, it takes a while. It takes experiences. It takes reading. It takes thought. Um, it's a journey that I never really gave up on, but I did. It kind of like a snowball. It gained momentum as I uh, as I accumulated years and experiences. Some of the early things, on my deployments, my first couple deployments before Iraq, we would be on ship a long time. So, I would bring a lot of books, and I would read. I read a lot of C.S. Lewis when I was on ship. Read a lot of history, about the places that we were going to dock next, get off in Southeast Asia, go explore Buddhist temples. Next thing you're in the Middle East. You can't enter mosques, but religion is just prevalent there. And the experience overseas, visiting religious sites. If you're a halfway curious person, you're going to start thinking about spiritual things, and you're going to start thinking about how these things, these sort of the great religions that you're coming into contact with, how they've affected the societies that they have. Why have they affected the societies they have? And then in Iraq, um, I had even more sort of intimate, connections uh, uh, with the culture. Having worked very closely with the Iraqis, and and then my own travels throughout Europe. In particular, my wife is from Portugal, so I have the good fortune of being able to travel to Western Europe a lot, and then of course through Russia. And all of these experiences, they really culminated in a um, sort of a couple things that I think you have to, at least for me, admit. First of all, you're kind of forced with that question. Okay, is there something else out there? And that's kind of the first question you have to answer, yes or no. To me, the answer was clearly yes. There's more than just the material world. To me, I can't explain the power of art without and how art makes me feel, or how my love towards my wife, or towards my parents, or those of my friends. I can't explain that just with the measurable, the seen. Um, so once you make that decision, then it's a matter of, okay, what is the nature of this other? Is it kind of an impersonal force, um, or is it more of a personal um, God? What exactly is that? And to me, that's where the real fun and the real interesting part of kind of the journey of faith begins. Um, you know, uh, to me, it's a very boring discussion that I have with an atheist, for example, about does God exist? It's like, okay, if God doesn't exist, there's really nothing to talk about here. I can point to you and how I don't believe that, but to me, the really fascinating discussion, when you finally get back past that point, when you get people in agreement that, okay, there is something else out there in the world. Now you can debate and argue and explore what the nature of that other is. And that's where you can talk about religions. You can talk about the great religions of the world, or different subsects in that. in addition to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, I also volunteer at the Rubin Museum of Art here in New York, which is basically Himalayan art. So that's primarily Buddhist and Hindu art. I enjoy studying Buddhism. I'm not a Buddhist, but I think that there are many things from it that you can learn from, and even the great well, I don't know, the Simone Weil, who was a French philosopher, Christian apologist. She even said, I believe, she found Christ through the Buddha, which I think is a very interesting, statement. Um, so to me, it's exploring now these different avenues of how to reach God. Um, and I think God is beyond our comprehension. But I eventually came back, or rather settled comfortably on Christianity, um, because to me, it made God the most accessible. And while I could not define what God is, you can define you the whole purpose of Christ was God in human form. We can't understand Christ, but we can't understand God. So Christ is more or less the fulfillment of the truth, the bridge, and I make that metaphor in the book to God. And it to me, it also answers a lot of other questions, which again, I try to articulate through Arcadie's journey in the book and through the different symbols that he sees. And I use a lot of scripture in the book to try to put the pieces together. And for you and your readers that are reading the book, I'm not necessarily making an argument for Christianity in the book. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to put puzzle pieces together to where um, how I made sense of my religious faith, and how I, through my experiences, how I came to recognize Christianity as the truth. Um, how where those pieces fit, how did I see that coming together? And that's
Well,
kind of
yeah,
what.
the book doesn't strike me as one of these polemics of, saccharine sweet. This is how you were, and then this happened, and then you became that, and now life is going to be happy, and the typical kind of Christian novel. It doesn't strike me as that at all. It strikes me more as we've talked a lot on my channel about the necessity of faith being embodied. It has to be your lived experience, and
Mhm.
it has to be lived not only through your own behavior, but through your connections with other people. And Arcadie's journey looks to me to be his lived experience of confronting these various questions, and confronting the experiences that he's going to go through, and grappling with them, and finding out what the bedrock is that's underneath all of that. Because at the bottom, I mean, the thing that I finally came to, because I went through, I I became a Christian as a rebellion against secular humanism, because
Mhm.
when I discovered what secular humanism really was and what its intentions were, I said, man, I don't want that, and I don't want it for me, and I don't want it for my family, but I have no idea what the alternative is. And then I happened upon a book that was called Secular Humanism in the Light of Holy Scriptures. And I said, oh, I'm going to read that and find out. So I was able to see this other side, because I didn't know anything about Christianity. And I was 30 years old, and this was all new to me. So, but
Yeah, absolutely. This is not, like you said. This is meant to be a very serious treatment of
mhm,
of the faith. In fact, it asks a lot of hard questions.
yeah, yeah,
And again, it's trying to put puzzle pieces together, almost like we were just talking about chaos and order, but trying to put these pieces together, and show how Arcadie, who has been uh, just kind of tossed around on the waves by the, forces that he can't control, whether it's the famines that I make reference to, the famines that happened in Western Russia in the Volga region in 1932, 1933, followed, then by just the repression of the peasantry that happened afterwards, and the sicknesses that came as a result, and then obviously the war, all these things he can't control, and it's why he's grown so bitter. How does the individual rise above that and claim victory, and find peace, claim victory, and that's the journey. That's the journey he goes on, and that's what he's trying to find, and comes to realize. He thinks he's finding that by searching for his wife, but she's only a part of it. There's a deeper need that can only be filled by, I believe, by Christ.
Mhm. Well, so I had asked you earlier if you had heard anything about Jordan Peterson, and a lot of his college lectures tell that whole story of the famines and the struggles that people went through in the Soviet Union, and that struggle with how does a person withstand that, and how modern youth today have no idea about those things, because first of all, they've not been educated about them, and secondly, they've not had to live through many of those things themselves, and so it's very foreign idea to them that that kind of suffering exists. So when they begin contemplating suffering at all, it tends to turn them against God, either against the idea of God altogether, or if there is a God, he must be evil. That's the one I'm hearing a lot lately. He must be evil. Why did he even bring us into this world if all this world is going to be is suffering? And that, so Jordan Peterson is trying to get at that thing of what causes this darkness and this nihilism in people. And is there a way that we can turn that around for people, where we can shine a light in there?
Mhm.
He does not point to Christ as the answer,
Yeah.
but does certainly explain the symbolism of Christ. And somehow, because of that, a lot of these young people are turning to Christ, and typically they turn to orthodoxy, which is very interesting.
Yeah, and I was going to kind of, I guess, complete my spiritual journey. I, I'm not a Catholic, but I do attend a Catholic church here in New York. In fact, I sit on the board for they have a historic organ, 19th century organ that they're trying to restore, that I sit on the board for. So I'm actually quite involved with the Catholic Church here, and um, I don't have, you know, I actually a friend of this that a friend of mine that I grew up with asked me recently. I've noticed you've had a kind of a turn to, what she called it the high church, as opposed to, some of the, the more charismatic, fellowship type churches that you see, um, particularly in the South, and I think in the West. Um, and I said, look, I have nothing against that. To me, when you pick a church, uh, your criteria should be in what environment and through what rituals, and do I feel closest to Christ, and in what environment do I feel Christ speaking most clearly to me. And I said that's kind of where I'm at right now. I said I like the silence of the mass. I like the tradition. I like the liturgy. I like the routine. I like the music. The very traditional music that the Basilica I attend goes to. And to me, that has um, that clears my my mind, and that helps me hear, I think, more clearly what Christ wants for me than the kind of the more charismatic, worship that you see in other churches.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, that circling back to your point about turning towards orthodoxy. um, I understand that, because in a sense I've sort of done that myself. And another point, I think, uh, people are created, and therefore they have a spiritual nature to them that has to be fulfilled, in some way. And this is really what's driving people. And it can drive you towards religion. It can drive you towards the church. Putting your faith in a God sort of outside this world, or as I think we're seeing more and more, it's driving people towards, um, uh, sort of secular faiths. And I also I allude to this in the book also, because there's, during the famines, um, in the Soviet Union, you there the Soviet government put together these brigades that went throughout these villages to try and collect grain, and forcibly collect grain, in order to be able to theoretically feed, all the villages more or less on an equal level. But I describe these members of these brigades as sort of riding into these villages on their horses, young, with this look of rightness and this look of religious zealotry almost in their eyes, like they had the answers to everything and nobody else. They possess a wisdom that nobody else possessed, and that's in their mind what gave them the authority to do what they did. Because in an atheist, uh, country like the Soviet Union, the state was the church. Atheism was the religion. The dogma of communism was, um, the religious dogma. So there was nothing higher than that. So when your God is the party, or when your God is the state, that's your religion. That's what you go to. And it's when we have people that buy into that, or look to the state or politics or party, or things like that for the substitute for a true relationship with their creator, um, I think bad things happen. And this is where you sort of get a God mentality, um, amongst certain people, that human beings have no right to have, because we are not infallible. We make mistakes, all of us. Nobody has the answer. Again, another point in the book, making this point that Christ is the only one that actually did not give in to any of the three temptations, that's described in the New Testament, specifically in the book of Matthew. Everybody else in history has given up, has given into the temptations. So Christ, as sort of the one who resisted the temptations of power on earth, although he did not get a statue, in this or that government capital, what you do see is a man crucified on a cross. That's Christ's statue. That's the price of giving up power in the world for power and permanent victory, uh, for eternity in heaven. And again, I make these analogies all throughout the book, trying to compare earthly power versus, I make the point that, if you think about it, you go to Washington D.C., you go to any capital in the world, and you look at statues of their heroes and their political leaders. They're always men or women standing tall above you, looking towards the future usually, and looking very powerful and strong. But the irony is they're dead. Not one of them, everything that they did on this earth, and a lot of them, obviously great men and women, but they weren't able to conquer death. And consistently depicted as dead on a cross is the one who is, you know, is alive, and the one who defeated death and came back. And whereas we're all looking up in awe at these statues, uh, Christ on the cross is looking down at us in a very humble gesture, having just sacrificed himself for us. And I think that's a great visual, you know, when you're and a great artistic visual. You know, that we didn't get a lot into how art, I think, affected, you know, some of my religious views, but you know, it affected it in a big way. I mean, I look at I look at particularly Christian art in you know, in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and you know, and this stuff really inspires awe within me, because if faith has taken hold of you, you know, like your whole self, you know, you see the lessons of Christ, you see the lessons of the temptations and power in just about everything, you know, that where you know, where the biblical narratives are depicted, and you know, you meditate on those, you contemplate those, and that helps you grow in your faith as well. So
One of the other things you can see through art is how really remarkable it is that faith has survived even the damages that the church has tried to impose upon it.
yeah, no, yeah, absolutely.
I think there's one painting I just loved in the Accademia in Venice. It covers an entire wall. It must be at least 20, 25 feet wide and 15 feet high. And it's called Feast in the House of Levi. But the
Mhm.
original title that the artist, whose name just escapes me just this moment, the original title the artist wanted to give it back in, I think it was painted in the 1600s, was The Last Supper.
Mhm.
He was commissioned to paint a Last Supper for a church, and he painted that painting. And they said it was such a travesty that they would throw him out of fellowship if he didn't at least change the name, because it couldn't be called the Last Supper, because that would be degrading to Christ.
Hmm.
So he changed it to Feast
Yeah,
in the House of Levi. But the
interesting.
only difference was that between his Last Supper and other Last Suppers is that it's all the apostles are sitting at the table with Christ, but they're all busy doing stuff, and they're
Mhm.
all talking to other people. And in the foreground, there are people playing cards, and there's a dog barking and getting fed, and there's children playing dice, and there's people trading goods in the background and passing money back and forth. And all this stuff is going on, which the church found just horrendous, that life should be going on around Christ. But
Yeah, right.
in the very center of the painting is Christ and a little boy, and they're talking. And this little boy is just looking up into his face avidly, giving him complete attention.
Yeah.
And that is the whole message of that painting. And to me, the fact that that artist saw to that depth and understood, and then painted that painting in spite of what the church tried to do to him, is um, a testament to the power of Christ.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, something else about a book, and for you and your readers, you know, as you go through it, you're going to find out I'm not making an argument for the church itself. I think the church is a vessel, but the church is a human institution too, that
Yeah.
has been, continues to be, and always will be corrupted. Um, but you know, the argument is for Christ, for the Christian narrative, um, again, which I think makes sense. And despite everything, like you said, just like the art itself, the message continues to shine through because it makes sense. You know, I think it does. Um, and you know, that my book, I guess, is, you know, my humble contribution to you know, the long line of Christian art and Christian literature. And again, my objective was not to treat the journey to Christ with kid gloves. It's actually a very brutal, um, you know, a very brutal journey with I think some very harrowing scenes that came directly out of my experiences and from my heart, and again, other kind of combined with other things that I find fascinating.
Were those sections difficult to write? I mean, did you find yourself having to relive the trauma in order to write those sections?
There was one um, uh, scene in particular. Um, it's actually if you're in have you finished chapter 3 or
I don't think I
okay.
could finish chapter 3. Yeah.
Okay, so there is a scene in chapter 3 that was actually taken. Arcadia is going to discover a youth who has basically been cut down
Oh,
in.
yes, yes, yeah. I've read that part. Yeah.
Yeah, that was taken from a direct experience that I had, and what made it even more tragic is that um, it wasn't even a teenager. It was a little girl
Mm.
who uh, just tragically got caught up in crossfire, and so they're very, again, very very difficult things, that I've that I've had to deal with, and but writing them down, kind of working through them has helped. So the book, was therapeutic in that sense, because again, faith is a journey, and you have to explore those things, and I think you have to face them, and you have to grapple with them, um, not just on your own internally, but with other people that that you rely on, and that you trust, and that can get over things. But there's never like a single switch that just says, everything is fine now. There's scars, as we all know, in life, that never go away. In fact, if I can, um, the you may not know this yet, but this is the first of 2 books.
Oh, okay.
So this is going to be continued, and and the conclusion is going to be out mid next year. But what we're going to sneak peek is, whereas this book ends in in 1942. The next book is actually going to start in 1994, at the height of the First Chechen War, and we're going to be introduced to an old man who receives a mysterious letter from Siberia. He's in Moscow, receives a mysterious letter from Siberia, and the next thing you know, he's boarding a train, about to go back into Siberia. And the questions are, who is he? What did the letter say? And again, between telling this old man story in 1994, but then telling in parallel the continuing story of Arcadia in 1942, and the two will eventually culminate together. So I tell you that not only to kind of give you and your viewers a sneak preview, and like any good Russian novel, it has to be multi-generational and all encompassing. That's like the rule. They have to be really psychologically, religiously intense. But I also decided on that because um, I the things that the some things that you deal in life that change your life and continually change your life, and that you have to work through. They take years to get through, and uh, as again symbolized by this old man that we're going to meet. He's still dealing with issues that he and experiences that he had, when he was a young man, and he's still trying to come to grips with those, and he's still trying to find reconciliation in a sense. So I did that on purpose because uh, just again to emphasize that powerful moments in our life, um, they take lifetimes to, I think, come to full grips with. And um, you know, if you find, you know, if to me, you know, rediscovering Christ has helped me deal with that a lot. But you know, there's still many years to be lived, you know, to figure out these mysteries of life. You know, and you know, I'm gonna do it.
Well, it's the courageous move to keep trying to find your way through these traumas of the soul, because if you don't, if you just try to put them in a box and hide them away, then you become hardened and cynical. And if you want any hope of remaining a vulnerable, loving human being, you have to be willing to go into those dark places and sort them out and let Christ heal them.
Absolutely, and yeah, face them. I think it's important to do that.
This has been a wonderful conversation, Reggie. And
Oh,
I can think of some people that I would love to have you talk with, who have a much bigger platform on YouTube than I do. And one of them is a guy by the name of Jonathan Pezzo. Have you ever heard of him?
I have not, but I will. I will.
Well, I'm going to see if I can send this video to, well, to somebody else that I know who has access to him. But Jonathan Pezzo is an icon carver.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, so he's an artist, but he's also, he and his brother Mathieu are very, very interested in symbolism. So he has a YouTube channel in which he discusses symbolism and how that symbolism relates to faith and how it relates to just the way reality lays itself out.
Well, if I may,
Could
real
be
fast,
Yeah, I was
you
looking.
probably noticed behind me is the Russian wing of my
Yep.
collection. You can't see it because it's out of the sunlight, but that icon right there,
Uh-huh.
it's called Portrait of a Monk Saint. That actually belonged to the Met up until last year, but it's a 16th century icon painted in Moscow. So during the rule of Ivan the Terrible, that's the centerpiece of the collection right there. Yeah.
Well, early in my life, well, I guess not early. When I moved to California, I was 40 years old, and I went to work for a consulting firm where we were training Americans and Japanese people how to interact with each other because of the cultural differences. And after I'd been doing that for a couple of years, the company decided to fan out and start working with Russian ideas, because it was right at the time that the wall had come down and Russia had opened up, and there were all these opportunities with oil companies. So we started working with executives who were going to be interacting with Russians. And so developing all this curriculum to know how to interact with Russians. And we brought in a couple who were Russian to kind of be cultural informants for us. And I got to be really good friends with the wife, whose name is Maria.
Mhm.
And she told me one time about this old Russian proverb. She says, I misunderstood. I told her about it recently, and she said, no, you misunderstood. That's not what the proverb is. But the way I understood it was very meaningful to me. The idea is a truth once spoken becomes a lie. And so what that said to me was that you can have, even if you can somehow grip the truth inside your head, which is not easy, but if you just have a glimpse of the truth, even if and maybe the truth is Christ, he is the way, the truth, and the life, you have this glimpse, then you start trying to articulate it. The minute you start trying to articulate it, all of your own baggage and preconceptions and all the complications that are inside you get in the way, so that the way you're describing it is no longer pristine and clear.
Yeah.
So that's one of the difficulties about describing faith and making it accessible to people. And that's why it's so lovely that you've taken the time to write an entire novel to allow people to work their way through all of these questions, because it's not like you telling somebody what to believe. You're just showing them the way the world lays out, and here are the options, and this is what happens.
No, I appreciate that, and that is what what I tried to do. I'm not trying to preach. That's not nobody, wants to read I mean, not this novel anyways, to be preached at. Um, I think people that read it have an interest in history, that would enjoy it, have an interest in history, have an interest in philosophy, and then an interest in how religious faith plays into that. How does um, you know how does religious faith stand up as an answer to war? How does it stand up as an answer to all of these other ideologies and political philosophies and out there that are constantly thrown our way and say you have to you follow this and you'll find happiness, and then nobody ever does. um, so that's who I think will enjoy it. That's who it was written for, people that are searching themselves, maybe trying to put things together, or people that just, I think, maybe want different avenues to approach their faith and look at it. And hopefully it's a compelling story at the same time. It's like one of the reviews said, it's a tree out of love, war, and religion. And that, to me, that's my favorite type of novel.
So I noticed that it's available in ebook format
It
and
is. Yep.
also as a paperback and hardcover. And
Yep.
can I put the Amazon link in the
Yep.
description for people?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Please do. Thank you.
Is there anything else that you would like to link people to? Do you have a website or?
Yeah, the website, it's a marketing tool. You can purchase the other links are, through the website, but the website is www.beyondtheurals.com. So just the title.com, no spaces or anything. So it'll take you directly to the website. The website has gotten rave reviews. So I had a very talented young woman work on that for me. We worked on it together, and she did an outstanding job. But the website will give you a preview of the book, of one of the subsets of one of the chapters, so you can read it. And then the website is also useful because it has a rundown of both the fictional characters, and of course this is a historical novel, so there are real life characters. So I've tried to bring in um, different Russian thinkers and writers from the past, kind of really demonstrating the whole cross section of Russian thought throughout history. And some of these are not household names. I mean, everybody's heard of Tolstoy or Dostoevsky, but very few have heard of Chernyshevsky or Chadayev or even Bakunin. So you can go to the website, and actually there's portraits of these men. You can click on that, or it'll take you to the Wikipedia page and give you kind of a summary of them, so you don't get lost. So the website, both kind of marketing, but as you're going through the book, you can also use it as a tool if you want.
It's interesting that you mentioned Bakunin, because I was just listening to a lecture. I think the lecturer's name was Ryrie, speaking at Gresham College about the title of the lecture was Jesus, Hitler, and the Abolition of God.
Oh, wow.
And he was looking at the move that's been made since the Enlightenment to abolish God. Mm-hmm. And he brought in Bakunin as one of the characters that he was talking about. And he had a really interesting thesis overall, and that was that where we've come to in this time period now is that we've lost the underpinnings of faith and of the traditions that are related to Christianity. Mm-hmm. And because of that, we've lost the idea of where the evil resides. And we've bundled all the evil up into Hitler and Nazism. And it's an easy target. This is what's evil. all of our efforts go against that, and we've completely lost the idea that evil resides in every human heart, and it's
Mhm.
really messy.
Yep.
And he said, the big problem with using that as your fulcrum to run a society is what happens when the next generation has no memory of Nazism, has no
Yep.
memory of what the war was about or why Hitler was who he was. You have no, you have no foundation whatsoever to run a civilization.
Yep. This gets back, I think, again, and we're probably running out of time here, but you know, there, I can, when I debate somebody on politics or philosophy in general, I usually start out with a very simple question to know if we're going to be able to eventually get to a point where we agree. And the question is, do you believe that man is inherently good
Mhm.
or inherently evil or fallen? My answer is consistent with the Christian worldview. Is I believe man is fallen.
Mhm.
We are we cannot redeem ourselves. We have to beg for forgiveness and accept that Christ, you know, there's that we are fallen. I think what is gaining steam, particularly with Christianity being pushed to the back burner, is the opposite view, where man is inherently good. And if we just do the right policy here, or touch the right button here, or do this or that, we can create this utopia. Because you know, if man is inherently good, then man can be God somewhere down the line. And that's when you run into whenever man has believed that you can create a utopia on earth, this is when the greatest crimes against humanity have been promulgated.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, to not recognize that evil within us um, is a grave mistake.
Well, that's not exactly a happy note to end
Yeah.
on, but this has been a fascinating conversation, Reggie. I so appreciate your generosity of time and spirit in sharing with us, and I'll try to hook you up with Jonathan Pezzo. And actually, it would be really fun to have you have a conversation with Jordan Peterson because you're right in his wheelhouse. And
Well, you know, I know he's a towering intellectual. You know, obviously he's you know, a phenomenal thinker and a great man. And it's just an honor to even have my name mentioned in the same sentence with him. So thank you. You know, I appreciate that. But I'm happy to talk with whoever you think might benefit from it. So
great. Well, if you just hold on a second after I turn off the record, then we can figure out if we're going to publish this thing. So I'm going to turn off the record button. And again, thank you, Reggie.
yeah.